I'll allow the gentleman from 23 with your permission. He's been trying to get up for quite some time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought I'd ask some questions, but I'm going to bypass that and get right to the debate.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The issues that I'm going to debate on have not been mentioned here today. I'm going to be talking to you about the proper role of government. I'm going to be talking to you about legal and illegal plunder as taught by Frederick Bastiat in his book, The Law. I'm going to be speaking to you about items that are in the Constitution and those types of things, and I will try to proceed carefully, Mr. Speaker.
And you'll draw each of those back to the House Bill 248, correct?
Pardon me, Mr. Speaker.
And you'll make a connection with House Bill 248 in each of those broad areas.
I sure will.
Thank you.
I sure will. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's one issue that has not been mentioned today for an option. Yes, we've talked about a federal exchange, and we don't want the federal exchange. We feel like the state exchange is going to be a better option. But there's one other option, ladies and gentlemen, and that is not to have either. And that is a possibility. And I'll explain to you why that is still a possibility. We're going to have an election in 2 years, aren't we? Well, do you think the Fed's really going to get the job done if they have to set up the exchange by then? I hardly think so. We have 25 states out there already that have said no thank you. Do you think they're going to be able to go into those states, and if we say no thank you, do the same thing here within the limits of time? I don't believe so, ladies and gentlemen. They just don't have the money to do it, and they don't have the manpower to do it. And all we've been asked to do is do it so they wouldn't have to do it. Now, the next point is this. For the last 2 years, we've had a United States Senator come and talk to us. And what was his final words when he spoke to us? He said, we've got to quit compromising and moving more and more to liberalism and the left. We need to start compromising. They need to start compromising and coming back with us. This bill is a compromise in the wrong direction, because this bill will put in one of the last nails into the coffin. Now, I will prove my point, and as the gentleman from 27 mentioned, he mentioned 120 years ago. I won't go back that far, but I will go back a little ways. In 1913, we had a change in the Constitution called the 16th Amendment. And let me read to you out of the Constitution that part that it changed. Article 1, Section 8, the first phrase. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, excises, to pay debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare. That's that term, general welfare, again. It's also in the Declaration of Independence. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Of the United States, but all duties, imposts, excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Now let's turn to Amendment number 16. Very short amendment, but it really takes care of some of the parts in Section 8, Phrase 1. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. Ladies and gentlemen, Congress originally only had the power to tax after the census, and they had to apportion it according to the state's populations. Had nothing to do with the amount of wealth that was in that state, had everything to do with the amount of people that lived in that state. And so they'd have the census, apportion the taxes, the state would collect the taxes and move it in. I'm moving there, Mr. Speaker. What happened in 1913 with that opened the door in 1936 for the Supreme Court to do this. In the case of Butler, previous to that time, and let's explain the words of general welfare just a minute. What did that mean to our founding fathers, general welfare? Did that mean that we're going to collect taxes from the whole population and then give everybody back a certain amount? The word general means everybody. No, it did not mean that. They didn't do that. The word general welfare meant to those people this, that through your ingenuity, your thinking power, your reasoning power, and your property called time, you could go out and harvest the resources of the earth and make those into things that would promote you and your family's general welfare to even be better. That's what it meant. It did not mean a redistribution of wealth that we look at today. And how do I know that? The founding fathers, and I just passed out a sheet, or had it passed out to you about Davy Crockett. Let's talk to you about that for a minute. Before I do, though, I'd like to explain to you the terms legal plunder and illegal plunder as taught by Frederick Bastiat in the book The Law. Illegal plunder is this. Say it very simply. And that's this. You go to your neighbor and take something and force him to give you something that you couldn't do yourself. And he gives it to you, or you take it. You can't legally do that, can you? That's called stealing. But guess what? We've empowered the government to make it legal to commit plunder. And all we do is say, our agent government, you go out there and collect those taxes and then redistribute those taxes to the have-nots. And I'm coming to that. But that's basically what legal plunder and illegal plunder is. All we did was change an illegal act to make it legal because our agent governments did it. Now let me ask you this question. Who in here believes in line of authority? I do. In other words, I can't give my government any right to do anything that I can't do myself. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. When a group of people got together, let's say to form a small community somewhere, and there might only been 10 or 15 people. And they hired somebody to go out and do what they have a legal right to do, and that's to defend themselves, their property, and their families. And they hired that individual to go out and do it for them. Did they have a right to do that? Yes, because they have a God-given right to do that themselves. And the moment they hired that gentleman and called him the sheriff, that's the beginning of government. They could not bestow into that sheriff one bit of authority they did not have themselves. Now, if this is a country of the people, by the people, and for the people, you tell me how we can legally give that authority to a government to do things for us that we can't do ourselves. That is a breach of our God-given rights. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we did that very distinctly. And then along comes 1936. And guess what happened in 1936? Basically because we got the 16th Amendment through. In 1936, we had a little case called Butler. And the Supreme Court, without precedent, changed the meaning of general welfare to private welfare. Because now they could tax us directly, without census, without apportionment or anything else, and take that money, and by changing the meaning of general welfare to private welfare, all of a sudden they could take from the haves and start giving to the have-nots. Now let me read you something that the Supreme Court said that probably counters that to some degree. And it was done in 1889, and it's on the paper I've passed out to you. One of them says this: why not assume that the framers of the Constitution, the people voted it into existence, meant exactly what it says? And then the one above that one: we are bound to interpret the Constitution in the light of the laws that existed at the time it was adopted. Are they doing that today? Did they do that in the Butler case? Heavenly days, I guess not. The thing that gave them the authority to do is when we changed the Constitution with Amendment 16. Now let's go on down and read that last one. The Constitution was written to be understood by the voters. Its words and phrases were used in their normal and ordinary meaning, as distinguished from their technical meaning. Where the intention is clear, there is no room for construction, no excuse for interpolation or addition. Well, ladies and gentlemen, they've gone quite awry from that, in the Butler decision in particular. Now, what happened after that? Let me give you a little family history, if I may, on that issue. Changing it from illegal plunder to legal plunder, as they did in the Butler case. Guess what I heard when I was a little boy being raised up? Born in 1938, the tail end of the Great Depression. I can tell you this, that was very hurtful to my family. I remember my grandmother saying this one time. They lived in Idaho Falls. There was one crust of bread left in the house. She had 5 or 4 children at the time. My dad was the youngest. And not a one of those kids were allowed to touch that piece of bread, because that was going to be for Uncle Soren when he got home from school, because he hadn't had anything to eat. I also remember my dad telling me how many nights they went to sleep at night, and guess what they had for supper? Lumpy Dick. You know what Lumpy Dick is? Boiling water with flour poured in it, and you ate that as it coagulated, and that's what you had for supper. So that depression meant a great deal to my folks. Along comes FDR. And he was their savior. Oh, they thought the sun rose and set in FDR. I even remember when I was a kid that my parents and other people in conversations, and I was just a boy, would listen. And guess what the term that came out once in a while was? A little socialism doesn't hurt.
Good gentlemen, can we get it back to House Bill 248 a little bit?
I'm headed right there, sir.
Yeah, hurry, please.
Okay. The point I'm driving at, folks, is this. The issue we're talking about here is exactly that. We have traveled down the road of socialism, 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 accepting a little more, a little bit more, and a little bit more. And what do we end up with? A floor here today that is discussing the merits of a federal exchange versus a state exchange. Not one word is said about no exchanges at all. Not one word is being said about, ladies and gentlemen, we are a state and we can say no thank you to both if we keep our company with those states that have said no. I don't think we can turn our back on them, ladies and gentlemen. If we do, how much harder is it going to be in the future to say, no, thank you? This is a defining moment. This is the most important vote I've had to make since I've been in the House, and this is my 11th year. Ladies and gentlemen, I implore you to think about these matters. Is it a proper role of government? And all the things I've talked to you about before then, how can this be a proper role of government when you don't have the authority to give your agent, the government, the right to do this? Where did you get it? You can't assume it. I'm saying to you, you'll be held accountable someday because of that. In closing, let me say this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for being patient. I have a whole bunch of grandkids. And my constituents have a whole bunch of grandkids. And Grandpa Nielsen and Representative Nielsen is not going to wake up someday in the future and have any one of them point at me and say, what did you leave us, Grandpa or Representative Nielsen? I'm saying, no, thank you.